Whatever time of day it is, KOAP Euro students, I'd like to welcome back you guys to another segment of a SIGcast, the never famous SIGcast in AP Euro. And I want to pick up where we left off yesterday. And, yesterday we had left you with a map talking about the centralization and consolidation of power occurring in the West, not so much in the East. And we're going to continue to develop that today with the Western powers at first with the talk of Spain. So in Spain, centralization would root itself the firmest and quickest of all the Western powers. Within 100 years of Ferdinand and Isabella, who began the process of centralization in Spain, Philip II had become the King of Spain and the New World, as well as the Netherlands, and had almost complete control of lawmaking power in his realm by the 1590s. Under Philip, Spain reached its zenith, as the 16th century became known as the Golden Age of Spain. In Spain, he determined the official religion, Catholicism, banning all others, and sent the Inquisition and soldiers and Jesuits to chase out all non-Catholics. He also, as we've mentioned, had developed a complex system of bureaucrats to help him collect taxes and to run his vast kingdom, which now expanded to the New World. While most Catholic leaders had laws against non-Catholics and collected taxes, none did on the scale or with as much authority as did Philip II of Spain. Ultimately, though, you're thinking, wow, way to go, Philip. Nice job. You are an absolute monarch. You're an absolute stud when it comes to ruling your realm. But the fact of the matter is, this proves disastrous for Spain in the long run. What they did was they persecuted the middle class, many of whom were Jewish and Moorish Muslims. And what ends up happening is the population in Spain decreases from the years of 1550 to 1650 from 7.5 million people to only 5.5 million people. So they're losing a lot of people. And the people they are losing are the industrious class. These are the people who would be responsible for innovation and business, furthering the economy. But what ends up happening is he persecutes them, they leave, and they take their creativity and their work ethic to other places, like France and the Netherlands, among others. And what ends up happening is they will help make those places rich and productive, while in the 1600s, Spain's golden age is but only a brief moment in time. I hope you liked that little pause for effect there. I hope you really felt the power of that statement, that would only be a brief segment. Now, again, listen, centralizing under the monarchy in Spain and France came at the expense. We need to understand this, and this is why it's underlined. It came at the expense of the power of the nobility. The nobility's time on top since the feudal times is ticking. These nobles who traditionally had their own taxes that they collected. They had their own laws that they answer to. And they also had, when it says militaries, they had their own armies that were answerable only to them, not the crown. We've already mentioned the Hermandades and the Inquisition in Spain, and a highly skilled, sophisticated, well-equipped army under Charles VII, as well as Louis XI, the Spider King in France. And the nobility is going to feel this effect in almost all areas of Europe west of Germany. Now, in the present, as well as in history, when sudden and massive changes or reforms happen quickly, there's going to be a backlash. And this time in history is no different. Both kingdoms will experience large-scale revolts in the early 1600s as nobles attempt to regain some of the power that they've lost. Of course, we're talking about the Catalan Revolt in Spain and the Fronde in France. And in Spain, the area of Catalonia grew tired of fighting endless wars of the Spanish king in Europe, as well as paying for the massive Spanish debt. Now, again, the wars and debt, where's it all come from? It's the numerous lopsided wars in which Spain usually found themselves on the losing side. I'm mentioning the 30 Years' War here, if you want to put that in your notes, and the ongoing on-again, off-again Dutch revolt. that they're not going to win. So the nobles and the people of Catalan refused to pay taxes to the Union of Arms and rebuffed the Count of Olivares. Count of Olivares was the chief minister under Philip IV from 1640 to 1652. And Count Olivares attempted to consolidate the province of Catalonia under the Spanish rule, basically forced them to submission. Now, again, there's a theme alert here. This is a theme that is ongoing throughout European history, and it's called the balance of power. France and the Valois family into the Bourbon dynasty would do what they could to check the power and the influence of the Habsburgs, as we've already mentioned. And again, if we go back to this map, you of course have Spain, which is Habsburg, the Holy Roman Empire, which is Habsburg, the Netherlands, which is Habsburg, all surrounding France. So when we talk about the balance of power, we know that the French are going to do what they can to check the power and influence of the Habsburgs wherever it may be. So what do? They aid the Catalonian revolt. They meddle in the affairs of Spain. Catalonia won. They left Spain. The king lost complete control over the military and taxes in that realm. Now, it should be noted that eventually they would be forced to return as a Spanish possession after the Fronde, a revolt in France that we'll talk about here shortly, broke out. French troops had to leave Catalonia. They could no longer occupy that particular territory and went home to defend the French government. That left the Catalonians vulnerable, and Spain sucked them back up. But again, a decade later, the same thing will happen in France. The monarchy won during the Fronde revolts and took control over taxes, and the army was actually increased. So, as you can see here on this map, Catalonia borders France. So again, it's an example of what I mentioned yesterday or in the previous segment of localized people not really caring so much about what supposed country that they were under or what monarch they were under. There was no real sense of nationalism that we kind of associate with or expect in modern times. So when issues of representation and taxation came up in these particular domains, some of these nobles didn't think twice about revolting. Again, as I said earlier, a decade later, the same essential thing happened in France. However, the monarchy won this revolt and again took control over taxes and increased its power and authority. A little background behind this. The French was under the direction of a man named Cardinal Richelieu, who was regent, or the guy that kind of ruled for Louis XIII. And he involved France in the 30 Years' War by aiding Protestant opponents of the Habsburgs, in particular Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. Don't really associate yourself right now and worry about the 30 Years' War. That's going to be coming up in an upcoming SIGcast. But again, France aided Protestant opponents of Habsburg-controlled Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. And because of this, he too is an example of a politique, putting not the religion first, putting the interests of the country and the people and the power of the French monarch over who he was fighting for religiously. He used something called the intendant system. The intendant system was aimed at stripping further power from the nobility, some which happened to be Calvinist and Huguenots. And in terms of expanding the state bureaucracy and making it more efficient, what he did under the intendant system was he replaced local officials, who tended to be members of the nobility, with civil servants. Again, civil servants usually from the middle class. Now again, middle class meaning non-nobility. And in France, these non-nobles are known as nobles of the robe. Old school nobility, they're known as nobles of the sword. So he's creating a new class of nobles that are going to be extremely efficient, but also ensures extreme loyalty to the crown. And these civil servants will report directly to the crown, no one else. This, along with the raising of taxes to pay for France's military, angered many in the nobility. He really taxed and hurt the farmers and peasantry as well, which is a trend that will continue in France all the way until 1789 with the French Revolution. Now, the revolt began in France when Louis XIV was around 5 years old. His regent was a gentleman named Cardinal Mazarin, who's pictured here in this slide. And, Mazarin was Richelieu's hand-picked successor to continue his expansion of royal authority in France under the Bourbons. However, kind of like Catherine de' Medici during the War of the Three Henrys, Cardinal Mazarin is not French. He's actually Italian born, so that's going to create some problems with him. And he needed to raise revenue to finish the job that Richelieu had started in the 30 Years' War. And he found some rather clever ways to raise taxes to fight the final stages of this war. He discovered an old law dating back to Henry IV, which forbade Parisians to build houses outside the city limits. Since the city had grown well outside its old boundaries in 1644, he decided, well, I'll tax these people. He imposed heavy fines on all those people who lived outside the city limits. And in addition, he taxed all merchandise being brought into the city. One measure caused particular resentment among the nobility. He imposed a special tax on all nobles who served on various royal courts and councils, amounting to 4 years of their fees. So it's like collecting 4 years of back taxes. And this was the final straw. The original goal of the insurrection was to protect the ancient liberties from royal encroachments and preserve the independence of the nobility. What it basically boiled down to was a rebellion against taxes. The nobility of Paris, known as the Parliament of Paris, held special meetings which were inspired by events in England, where Louis XIII's brother-in-law, Charles I, had recently had a dispute with their parliament over taxes that ended in Charles I's beheading. So there's momentum around Europe here of the nobility and people standing up to their monarchs. And they basically stated what in American history Patrick Henry and his boys like to say, no taxation without representation. They wanted to have consent or be at least involved in the process of deciding what taxes and how much taxes were to be paid to the state and at what rate. And in the end, there was division amongst the nobility, as usually happens, over leadership and direction. So after initial success, they met failure. Mazarin and Louis XIV took advantage of the division and put the revolt down. Propaganda can be seen in this slide by the sculpture in the right portion of the screen, where Louis is seen ruthlessly putting down the Fronde. Truth is, he was a scared youngster. During one of the uprisings, a group of angry protesters broke his windows and stormed into his bedrooms. As you can imagine, as like a 5 or 6-year-old, that would be pretty frightening. A little tidbit: the name Fronde comes from a children's sling, which was used by a lot of the Parisians as they took to the streets hurling rocks at the people who supported Mazarin, as well as the buildings that they dwelled in. The Fronde initially, like what do you need to know, was significant for a couple of reasons. First, it was the last attempt at the nobility to thwart the ever-growing development of absolutism in France, until, of course, the French Revolution. Their last-ditch effort. Absolutism will be here to stay. And for that reason, this is the second reason this is important. Young Louis XIV became determined to totally control the nobility after the revolt and provide an incentive for Louis to establish what we know as absolutism, since the disorders eventually discredited the feudal concept of liberty. People used the unrest of the Fronde and in France to justify that the only type of government that would maintain stability would be an absolute government. That ends today's installment of the SIGcast for the centralization of power that occurred around the time of the Renaissance and the Reformation. See you next time. Have your notes ready to go. Thank you.